Welcome to our fun little study group for PP 5340, Introduction to Public Policy and Management. These are the readings from the required text, Essential History for Public Administration, Chapter 3. The world can change in a single lifetime, but what happens when it changes so fast it feels like it's coming apart at the seams? Today, we're diving into the Progressive Era, a time of absolutely mind-blowing invention and deep social turmoil that completely reshaped the role of government in America. It really laid the foundations for the world we live in right now. So here's our game plan for today. To really get a handle on this massive shift, we're going to first look at the dizzying speed of change, and then we'll pull back the curtain on the dark problems hiding just beneath the surface. We'll see how everyday people fought back, how the government was pretty much forced to step in, and finally, how they forged the modern state we basically recognize today. All right, first up, to really get the Progressive Era, you've got to understand the incredible, almost dizzying speed of change Americans were living through. We're talking about some serious national whiplash. I mean, just look at this. We're talking about a single generation, 30 years, where daily life in the cities became almost unrecognizable. Seriously, think about that. The world went from kerosene lamps and outdoor toilets to electric lights and modern plumbing, kind of in the blink of an eye. And these were the engines driving it all. Mass-produced steel didn't just mean bigger buildings. It meant skyscrapers that scraped the clouds. Refrigeration meant you could eat food grown across the country. And cars? They went from being a total novelty to a common sight almost overnight. At its core, all this tech was transforming America from a quiet, rural, agricultural society into this super fast-paced industrial nation of employees. This quote from a British visitor just nails the feeling of the time, doesn't it? This sense of a constant, buzzing, technological whirlwind. It must have felt like you were literally living in the future. But, and this is a huge but, this incredible progress came at a really steep price. All that glittering change was creating immense social problems, hiding just beneath a shiny, gilded surface. And that's exactly where the name the Gilded Age comes from. Mark Twain coined it. On the surface, yeah, everything looked golden and prosperous. But underneath, society was really struggling with some ugly truths. This description of New York City, wow, it gives you a pretty visceral and, frankly, gross image of the grim reality. For so many people crammed into the cities, especially new immigrants, sanitation just wasn't a thing, and the living conditions were appalling. 60. Let that sink in for a second. 60 hours was the average factory work week. Can you even imagine that? These new factory jobs were often mind-numbingly repetitive, low-skill, and incredibly dangerous. This wasn't just a job. It was your entire life, spent in some pretty grueling conditions. And the problems went even deeper than that. You had wealth getting concentrated in the hands of a few robber barons, while the gap between the super rich and the dirt poor grew into a massive chasm. This so-called progress was not shared equally at all. It was built on the displacement of Native Americans, a system of racial oppression in the South, and, of course, the fact that women couldn't even vote. So you've got all of this, the poverty, the dangerous work, the staggering inequality. It was all building up to a breaking point. A powerful, widespread demand for reform was starting to bubble up from the ground up. Now, this wasn't some overnight explosion. The pressure for change had been building for decades. You had farmers, factory workers, and social reformers, often women, by the way, who had been organizing and fighting back against the harsh realities of this new industrial world for a long time. These early movements, they laid all the crucial groundwork, but it was one particular tragedy that would just completely shock the nation's conscience and become this incredibly powerful catalyst for change. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire was a totally preventable catastrophe. When the fire broke out, workers ran to the exits only to find them locked by the managers. The fire escape, their only other hope, just collapsed. The horror of people on the street watching young women jumping from the windows was seared into the public's memory. In the end, 146 people died. The public outcry was just immense. People were furious, and it forced the government to act. In New York State alone, more than 30 new laws were passed regulating workplace safety. It was a clear, powerful signal. The old hands-off approach to business was just not going to fly anymore.
So, this tragedy really helped usher in a brand new era. An era where government, spurred on by public demand, started taking on a completely new, much more active role in American society.
And you see this just massive wave of reforms at the state and local levels. All of a sudden, governments were tackling everything from child labor and food safety to housing codes and workers' comp. This was, for all intents and purposes, the birth of the modern regulatory state. And up at the national level, you had President Theodore Roosevelt, who basically became the face of this new era. He wasn't afraid to use the power of the presidency to take on giant corporate monopolies, the trusts, and to champion causes like environmental conservation. And his commitment was just staggering. Roosevelt set aside these huge tracts of land, creating 150 national forests, dozens of other protected areas, and 51 bird refuges. He was actively fighting to protect America's natural resources from just being gobbled up by unchecked private development. This quote really gets to the heart of the new way of thinking, this idea that government has a duty of stewardship, a responsibility to preserve and protect resources for future generations. I mean, that was a radical and powerful shift in how people saw government's role. Okay, so finally, if government is going to have all these new responsibilities, it's going to need a new kind of government to handle them. So let's explore the lasting legacy of the era. The creation of the modern administrative state itself, the actual machinery of how our cities and towns are run. To fight the corruption and inefficiency that was just rampant in big cities, reformers started experimenting with new government structures. The mayor-council form kind of mirrored the federal government, with separation of powers, but the council-manager form, well, that borrowed its structure from the corporate world, with a professional manager acting like a CEO. And that experiment had a huge, lasting impact. Check this out. That professionalized, efficiency-focused council manager model, born right out of the Progressive Era, is now the most common form of city government in America today. Pretty wild, right? So the Progressive Era really laid the foundation for modern public policy and the administrative state that we know today. They responded to the crises of their time by forging new tools and new roles for government. And that leaves us with a really critical question to think about. What foundations for government are we building today?